Hello, beautiful people.
Are you ready to start?
Why not?
Let's roll.
First, how are you doing? I know it's been, like we said, it's been a hectic time, and I know you're busy on top of everything else going on.
Yes. Oh my goodness. It has been very busy. I am about to graduate law school, which I'm very excited about. But definitely a very strange time to be a lawyer. Um, a very strange time to be somebody who cares about the law and disability rights and civil rights generally. But trying to just keep my head above water and focus on the people and the communities that I care about to get through this weird time.
Absolutely. So I wanted to talk about, of course, Section 504 is the big
Yes.
topic right now for us. But
Yeah.
first, I want to let you know, go into detail and tell everyone about yourself and your background in disability law. I know we kind of just touched on it,
Yeah.
but just anything else you'd like to mention.
Yes. My name is Britt Belwine. I am in my third year of law school, and my work focuses on the intersection of disability and incarceration. Before law school, I was a law fellow with the Coelho Center for Disability Law Policy and Innovation. Mouthful of a name, but a really incredible program. Um, And I really got my start in organizing, in disability activism, and that really just translated to a desire to want to advocate for my community, and realizing that law is a place that is we're very underrepresented. It's a field that is really inaccessible to so many of us. But as we say, there can be nothing about us without us, and the only way that's going to change is if we have disabled people in the rooms, in the courthouses, making these decisions, bringing our perspectives to the legal field. So I've been working in disability rights for the last couple of years, doing work at protection and advocacy agencies, and with other nonprofits that focus on disability rights. And I'm very excited to continue that work when I graduate.
It's amazing. And we also have talked, actually, last March, we released an
Yes.
episode where we talked about the intersectionality of uh, prisoner rights, and disability rights,
Yes.
which was a very interesting topic I had not thought about in the past. So if
Yeah.
anyone's interested, please listen to that one. If you feel comfortable, will you talk about just a little bit about your disabilities and chronic illnesses, things like that?
Yeah, so I was born with Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. It's a hereditary degenerative connective tissue disorder that affects basically all of the body. For me, it's primarily impacted my mobility, my ability to walk. Um, I often use a cane or other mobility aids to get around. And because of complications from the Ehlers-Danlos, I have a complex regional pain syndrome in my left leg, which is a chronic nerve pain condition that basically makes it feel like that part of my body has literally been set on fire at all times. So I'm usually dealing with some combination of chronic pain and difficulties with mobility and movement, but my health is very unpredictable. Um, I can be fine one day and the next day land myself in the hospital, which can be tricky to navigate when you are in law school, when you are working in a profession that does not do well with unpredictable. But
Hmm.
it's been really exciting to find ways not only to advocate for my clients and for my peers, but to learn to advocate better for myself as well.
Yeah, I cannot imagine doing law school with such unpredictable health. I would say mine's like fairly predictable, in certain ways, but I also was in an Bachelor of Arts degree, so not law, so I can't imagine doing that.
Yeah.
But yeah, thanks for talking about that a little bit. And I
Yes.
know, like I said, we talked about that before, but just a little refresher because it has been a little bit.
Yes.
Um, but the important topic is Section 504. Can you
Yeah.
talk about just, I'm going to kind of let you take the lead on this. I have
Okay.
some questions, but just starting out with what is Section 504?
Yeah. Section 504 is a federal law that prohibits discrimination against people with disabilities. It was the first civil rights law that protected disabled folks from discrimination. And it was passed after a lot of activism from the disabled community. The government really did not want to pass this law. They took forever to actually write up regulations that are kind of what they're like regulations are like parts of the law that tell you how you're going to enforce the law. They took forever to write these regulations, so disability activists actually staged sit-ins in federal buildings across the United States. The longest in San Francisco lasted over a month, and they really put their bodies on the line to show that disabled people are powerful and will not be ignored and need to have equal rights. So Section 504 has been around for about 50 years, just over 50 years. It's got a pretty good, strong history at this point. But and it oh it's well before I before I get into the but, it's also kind of the foundation that the Americans with Disabilities Act was built on. So Section 504 says that the executive branch of the government or any entity that receives federal funding cannot discriminate against people with disabilities. So that includes schools, universities, hospitals, airports, anything that receives like federal grant money, they have to comply with Section 504. That also includes state governments. So any state that receives federal funding, the most common example is Medicaid, they have to comply with Section 504. And if any of those, state governments or other institutions don't comply with Section 504, they can lose their federal funding. So that's sort of that enforcement mechanism is really what keeps Section 504 going, because if you don't have any way to enforce the law, people aren't going to follow it.
Mhm.
So that financial aspect is really key. But what we are seeing right now is 17 states trying to sue to get a court to declare that Section 504 is unconstitutional and that we should get rid of it.
And I will quickly, that was my next point, is the 17 states. I just want to list them here because I have
Yeah.
them. It is Texas, which is where this started.
Yes.
Alaska, Alabama, Arkansas, Florida, Georgia, which is where I live, Indiana, Iowa, Kansas, Louisiana, Missouri, Montana, Nebraska, South Carolina, South Dakota, Utah, and West Virginia.
Yep.
Mind blowing.
Mind blowing.
Mind blowing for sure. So, can we just talk about this lawsuit?
Mhm.
How it originated? And I have something I read up on of how it originated. I'm interested to talk about that in a second. But so where did this originate and why? I know it started in Texas, but what was their reasoning?
Yeah, so I will give my little legal disclaimer here that I have to give that I am not a lawyer. Nothing I
Hmm.
say is legal advice. But I will
Absolutely. Hmm.
just, I have to say that. But hopefully I can help maybe demystify some of this legal language, because if there's one thing we learn in law school, it's that the law is really confusing.
Hmm.
And I think it's often intentionally very confusing because lawyers and people who have power are able to hold on to that power when people don't fully understand what their rights are or what's going on in the courts.
Yeah,
Um,
I took one law and ethics class for media, and it's
yeah.
classified as the hardest class in our department, we
Oh my
say.
gosh. Yeah.
Right, and under that is advertising. So I will say it is very confusing, and I just did
Yes.
it purely in media aspect, not overall. So yeah.
Yeah, it's confusing. So I have read through this lawsuit, and yes, it started in Texas. Um, this lawsuit, it's so confusing. If people are listening and want to try to decipher some of this themselves, you actually can find a copy of the complaint filed by these 17 states. It's out there on the Texas Attorney General's website. So it started with the Texas Attorney General. And the Texas Attorney General, whose name I should know, uh, let's just pull up his name. Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton is his name. He's the person that started this fun adventure we are on.
Hmm.
Um, Texas has a couple of bones to pick with Section 504. And it seems like where this starts is with a rule that the Biden administration passed in 2024. So as I mentioned with Section 504, there's the law that says what you have to do, and then there are what's called regulations. So, this is what a federal agency does. They create regulations that help people understand how they're supposed to comply with the law and what they have to do to enforce it. So, Section 504, that's under the Department of Health and Human Services. And every now and then they add new regulations. They create new rules that are meant to keep the law in line with the times. So in 2024, one of the rules that the Department of Health and Human Services passed for Section 504 was mentioning that one example of a disability could be gender dysphoria. And this this makes sense with how Section 504, what it already includes is disability, because the idea is that the distress caused by gender dysphoria is disabling in the same way that the distress caused by depression or post-traumatic stress disorder or anxiety are disabling. It fits pretty neatly within that category of disability. And with that new rule, you cannot discriminate against people who have diagnosed gender dysphoria, who need accommodations, who want to be able to access healthcare to help them manage or treat that gender dysphoria. Um, and that is the rule that it seems Texas has a problem with because Texas wants to be able to discriminate against trans people.
Yeah,
And they
essentially.
say they say it like pretty explicitly in their complaint that um, they want to be able to discriminate. And if they discriminate against trans people who have gender dysphoria in ways that would count as disability discrimination, for example, not allowing them to receive medical treatment, not providing them with accommodations at work to help manage that distress, if they don't do those things, they could lose their federal funding. And Texas is basically saying, how dare you? That's not fair. You can't take away our federal funding because we want to discriminate against a whole group of people. That's
Yeah.
not just.
So that is what I also had written down was that one little tidbit that was added in 2024. So, but my thought is, and this is a little, I guess, bias on my side, but so I'm not in a place to speak on gender dysphoria personally. I don't have experience in that. However, to me personally, it seems that like these lawmakers don't really care about that because if they did, they would specifically be targeting that phrasing in that in the
Yeah.
in section 504. And I know they care that they want to discriminate against them, but if that was
Yeah.
truly the
Mhm.
case, why are they targeting the entirety of section 504 and not just rebuttaling the addition of gender dysphoria?
Yeah.
I don't
That,
understand where that they're using as a catalyst to just essentially discriminate
mhm.
against the entire disability community.
Yes.
Um,
Yeah.
and I know from what I read, some states were just specifically rebuttaling against gender dysphoria, while others were all the entirety of Section 504. Did
Yeah.
do they have any reasoning as to why they're doing one or the
Yeah.
other?
That is the question of the hour. So
Hmm.
they don't really explain in their complaint why they choose this argument, why they start with talking about how gender dysphoria should not count as a disability, and then move to say all of Section 504 is unconstitutional and you should get rid of it. Their argument for why Section 504 is unconstitutional is because they say it's financially coercive. So they're kind of drawing this parallel to, well, if we would lose our federal funding for discriminating against people with gender dysphoria, that's not fair. But also, we shouldn't lose our federal funding for discriminating against any people with disabilities. Basically saying that it's not fair of the government to tie federal funding to Section 504 compliance. They say that Section 504 is too broad, and so it's just not fair. But there are a lot of laws which the compliance and the enforcement of those laws is also tied to federal funding. A really common example is the drinking age.
Hmm.
So in every state, the drinking age is 21. And it is that way because when Congress decided they wanted to encourage or mandate states to raise the drinking age to 21, that they would withhold federal funding for highways unless states agreed to raise the drinking age.
Oh, wow.
So
Okay,
this
I
is
didn't
a,
know that.
yeah, yeah, and this is what you learn in your constitutional law class, um, that there are ways that Congress can tie federal funds to certain laws that they say, we've passed a law, you can either adopt it or not, all of you states out there, but if you don't follow it, you're going to miss out on some extra money somewhere. And
Okay.
there's like debate. There's some times where states have gone to court and said that, this law is too broad or the financial aspect is too coercive. And the court has said, okay, states, you're right. Congress, you can't do that. But there are also plenty of times where the courts have said, no, that's actually fine. Congress can do that. It kind of just depends on the law and the specifics of it. But that's kind of where these states are putting their claim down, saying that the financial aspect is too coercive, that 504 is way too broad of a law. It's just not fair. But I think the real question is trying to suss out, yeah, is this 17 states trying to use transphobia to go after disability rights? Is this 17 states going after trans rights and letting disability rights kind of be like thrown under the bus in the process? Or is this 17 states saying, let's just kill two birds with one stone and attack both of these groups at once? It really could be any of the above because they
Yeah.
don't say clearly what their goal is here. And the complaint is kind of all over the place. It talks a lot about gender dysphoria and that rule being unfair, talks a lot about the financial aspect of 504 being unfair. And then it also talks a lot about Olmstead, which is a Supreme Court decision that found that it was disability discrimination to force people to live in institutionalized settings when there were
Mm.
less restrictive alternatives available. So things like being able to get at-home care or do outpatient treatment rather than living in a locked institution. So it feels like reading this complaint, they're kind of just throwing all of these things at the wall to attack disability rights in a way that is confusing, um, outside, like it's so confusing in the sense of it's hard to make sense of what their goal is other than they're clearly looking to undermine disability rights law.
Yeah, and I think it's important to note that those three options that you mentioned of who they're attacking and why, none of it's a good option.
None
No,
of them
let's
are good.
clarify. None of
Nope.
it's a good option, and it doesn't make sense. It
Yep.
seems to me, well, I can say two things. One, it seems that I can compare the financial thing as a looking at it from the point of view as a citizen is if we break a law, we get a fine. So
Yeah.
there's in every situation of the law, essentially in America and other countries as well, there is a financial aspect to it, and whether it's some kind of fine or losing out on money, whatever. So to me, it's not that out of the realm of what's been done in the past, you know. Um, and I'll also say it seems that this administration is really focused on money, and
Yes.
that's their
Hmm.
basis to basically do anything. It seems, and
Yeah.
um, my I've always talked about how, money isn't all that I like care about. It's also people's rights and human rights, and I think that
Yeah.
um there can be an extreme both ways, and I think we're leaning towards some financial side of things
Mhm.
currently, and it's
Absolutely.
affecting people's rights.
Totally.
So yeah.
Absolutely. It's people who hold power right now who would rather hold on to their money
Hmm.
than have all people be able to enjoy freedom and rights and experience life. And so it's just it's wild because I think, yeah, for people like us who care about other people, I cannot imagine a world in which I would be happy letting an entire group of people lose access to being able to just participate in the world in order to save some money.
Exactly.
And
And if we,
Section 5 of, oh, go ahead.
I was gonna say, and also if we care about the monetary value so much, like these people not having the rights, they're losing out on their money and their freedom to make
Yes.
money and live a comfortable life. I mean,
Yeah.
still under the protection of law. Currently, I struggle with insurance in the government and how the money situation works and not getting fined, but also it's just the whole and Social Security and all that stuff. So like
Yeah.
it there's money involved either way. You're just do they want to be selfish and care about their own
Yep.
or
Yeah.
everyone's is what it seems to
Totally.
be. Yeah.
Exactly. And it's hard. I think some of us in the organizing space have been trying to think about, are there arguments we can make to get people who care more about money to care by saying, hey, if we lose Section 504, you know, people with disabilities aren't going to be able to participate in the workplace, in the economy. You are losing disabled customers who would be happy to come to your establishment and buy things if we can get in the door, or if we're able to afford mobility aids or medical care that allows us to keep doing these things.
And
Um,
I don't know what the percentage is, but like so much of America has a disability, whether it's diagnosed or not.
yeah.
Taking that out of the economy is a big deal. It's a
It's a
big
big
deal.
deal. Yeah, we are the largest minority.
Mhm.
So it doesn't make sense to just cut off this population of people from the world. Whether you approach it from an economic standpoint, which I recognize is sometimes the argument you have to make. But, I hope that people will also see it too from that, just the human standpoint of like, yeah, we should all have the right to exist in the world. And Section 504 is a law that allows people to do that, that requires that airports have to be wheelchair accessible, that local governments need to have emergency evacuation plans for people with disabilities, as we've seen the importance of in the recent LA wildfires. It's
Mhm.
all of these things that protect so many people. And to throw all of that away because 17 states have decided that it's too expensive to make the world accessible when they've had to follow this law for over 50 years already. It's just, it feels bad.
Yeah, and I can say that like even with these laws, there's still like a discrepancy in like the airports. So many
Mhm.
wheelchairs still get destroyed. The
Yeah.
wildfires, people you really realized how many disabled people were left or just didn't have that evacuation. And I encourage people to go watch Molly Burke's video. She's a blind individual and she lives in LA part of the time and most of the time, and she talked about her experience. Luckily, she had her boyfriend there and her partner there to help her get out because she said all she could feel was one inhaling the smoke, hearing sirens and cars and literally people running, and she didn't know where to go, and it was all her partner's build a. And they've only been dating for a few months, but thankfully they were together. And he was like, got her in the car, got her out, got her guide dog out. Like there was no. And I've read countless stories like right after or right when the wildfires were happening. I read like so far I've been like right under 10 disabled individuals passed away in the fires because they couldn't get out, stuff like that. I saw a
Right.
video, an elderly woman in a nursing home was left. They did a head count and missed her. And luckily the fire department was able to find her and got her out in time. The fire was knocking on the back door of the
Wow.
building. And it's just so many scary stories all over social media that I read. And they were not in the media. Most of them were not in the media. It was on social media, firsthand experience. I've seen one thing from People Magazine, I think, and other than
Yeah,
that, no news about it, and it's disheartening to see. And it was so scary. It was so
absolutely.
scary. And the same thing in
It's
North Carolina. It was so scary.
Yes. Oh my gosh, it's terrifying, especially with, climate change, with all of these natural disasters becoming more and more common. The thing is, as Amani Barbaran says, a lot of these climate disasters, pandemics, these become mass disabling events. And so
Mm-hmm.
people who survive these events, maybe they're able-bodied when that fire hits or that hurricane hits, but they might become disabled through the disaster. And then the next time there is a disaster, they find themselves unable to evacuate, or they come back from a disaster and aren't able to go to work or go to school or access medical care in the same way they were able to before. Their homes might be inaccessible to them now. And so, we all either die young and able-bodied or we live long enough to become disabled. Um,
Yeah.
it really does impact all of us in so many ways, and it's frustrating to see people going against, their own best interests in advocating against disability rights. And, Texas is a prime example. Governor Abbott of Texas, he's a
Mm-hmm.
wheelchair user.
Yeah.
What is he doing out here supporting the elimination of laws that allow him to get into the state house in the first place?
Yeah, exactly. And I just think like I live in Georgia, inland. I do not live on the coast, like anything like that. And those hurricanes hit back to back. And as someone who lives in northern Georgia, it affected me. We lost power back to back. Like when the hurricanes hit the last few years, I lost power for over a week. And my bed uses power. My chair has a charge.
Yeah.
Luckily, I wasn't sick, so I wasn't using my breathing machine things and equipment. And so, like, we were having to use my dad's and our diesel tractor, run a converter in through my window to get the bed situated, to charge my chair, or this and that. And it, I don't know, and like I can't imagine, and like the power companies can put you on a list, and but if they weren't required to do that, who knows if they would? Or,
Right.
and there's so many things I think about, like these backup things. I can't imagine that. I'm fortunate enough not to live somewhere where I would typically have to evacuate, and for tornadoes, I'm fortunate enough to have a basement and a way to get down there. But I don't live on the coast. I don't live where fires are,
Right.
typically happen during fire season. And I can imagine I'd be living in constant. I already
Mhm.
live in constant anxiety for certain things. I can't imagine how to add natural disasters to that.
Right, it's too much. We've got enough to worry about. So
Yeah,
many disabled people are just out here every day. Like we're all just trying not to die.
exactly.
Um, and that is hard enough in itself. We don't need to worry about all of these additional things that, you know, you expect a government to be able to provide for, to require that
Hmm.
people provide adequate emergency services, provide access to basic needs and basic rights. Um, yeah, it's terrifying, I think, to imagine what a world without all of these protections looks like, because you're absolutely right. We just don't know if companies and schools and hospitals and airports would keep providing those same services if they weren't required to.
And we're already seeing that not even in, the disability community, but DEI
Yeah,
funding for companies that are own self-funding or their departments or whatever are already being rolled back or dismantled because they know it's
right.
not required through the current administration.
Yeah.
And DEI, of course, includes disabled individuals, but
Yeah.
oftentimes there are certain laws just for disabled individuals, and if they see, oh, these can go away too, I
Hmm.
could see most of them just getting rid of them immediately.
Right, right, because they're gonna think, well, it's more expensive to accommodate disabled people, so why bother when we can just save money and, cut this group of people out from our organization, our world.
Yeah, I can't. I don't know. I keep thinking about it more and more. And as we were DMing and talking more recently, and just on social media, of course, I follow on, especially on Instagram, disabled individuals and advocates, and I just see it more and more, and it gets me thinking more and more, and
Yes.
worrisome thinking, but it's thinking
Yeah.
nonetheless. And so, as this, we talked about interviewing, I was like, oh man, I was laying in bed last night, making sure I got all these questions. I was like, oh, I know I'll get so sidetracked.
Right. There's
Just
just so
thinking about all
much
the
to
things.
so many
Yeah,
possibilities, and like you said, all of the possibilities are not great.
exactly.
um but I think a possibility that we are hopeful in pursuing is trying to convince some of these attorney generals to withdraw from the lawsuit.
Mhm.
um because the way that courts work is when you're in a federal court, you start in a trial court. This is called a district court. So this case is starting in the Northern District of Texas, and that's where it will be argued in trial for the first time. And whoever loses can appeal the decision up to a court of appeals. So that's going to be what's called a circuit court in the federal system. You might hear people talk about things like the Ninth Circuit, the Third Circuit. That's what they mean is the first level of federal appeal. So this would be the Fifth Circuit. The Fifth Circuit covers, I believe it is Texas, Louisiana, and Texas, Louisiana, and all of Mississippi. Those three states are the Fifth Circuit. So any appeals from those three states, they all go to the same circuit court. And the Fifth Circuit is notorious for ignoring the Constitution and all of the rules of law and precedent that courts are supposed to follow, and kind of just deciding whatever they want. They're very conservative. They are very willing to disregard the rule of law. So if it goes up to the Fifth Circuit, we kind of have a strong sense that the Fifth Circuit would find in favor of the 17 states. Now, if that happens, the losing party can appeal the decision up to the US Supreme Court, but this Supreme Court is not a particularly rights-friendly bunch either. And they've shown that time and time again.
Yeah.
So our thought for those of us who have been trying to coordinate some organizing around this is we really want to try to stop this lawsuit from even getting to a full trial. Because if it goes up on appeal, there's just more and more risk that the decisions there could be really bad for people with disabilities and could impact everybody. So we are working on encouraging people to contact the attorneys general. I think that's the proper grammatical way to say it. I don't know why they decided to make it attorneys general, but the, the attorneys general of these states, and try to encourage them to drop the lawsuit, to withdraw from the lawsuit, because a lot of these attorneys, when people have started calling, will say things like, oh, well, I don't want to get rid of Section 504. I just, want to get rid of the rule about gender dysphoria, or I just want the law to be more narrow, or whatever. And it sounds like a lot of them haven't actually read and fully understood what they signed up for. And so I
Mhm.
think there's room to push a lot of them to drop this lawsuit. And the reason people are pushing for them to withdraw rather than to just change what the lawsuit is asking for is because we're worried that some of these attorneys general will say, okay, well, we won't go after 504, we'll just go after gender dysphoria. And one, we want to be in solidarity with trans people because so many disabled folks are trans or non-binary. So many non-binary and trans folks are disabled. There's so much overlap and we support each other. But there's also concern that allowing them to challenge gender dysphoria's status as a disability could open the door to further challenges for other disabilities. For example, what if some attorney general decides that they don't want to have to accommodate people with HIV/AIDS, which was a big battle back, in the 80s, the 90s. What if Robert F. Kennedy Jr. decides that he doesn't think mental illness is real, as he's kind of alluded to already, and doesn't want that to be a disability? It sort of opens this door for people to go after different conditions and different disabilities in a way that I think would be really harmful to all disabled people. And so our hope is that we can convince them to just withdraw from the lawsuit and drop the lawsuit rather than trying to just attack the trans community or, just attack a certain group of disabled people.
So you just kind of summed up a lot of my questions. I kind of did. So I was going to say, where's the lawsuit now in the process? So I assume it's still pretty early on in the district.
It is, yes, it's still in the district court. There was a hearing on February 25th where both parties were supposed to just kind of give the judge an update on where the case is at and where they expect to be soon. Um, and after that hearing, I believe that the judge ordered them to have another hearing where they will update the judge. I want to say it's April 21st. Um, let's see. Yes, April 21st is when both sides, the 17 states and the Department of Health and Human Services, will have to report to the court what they want, what they plan to do. So we're all kind of waiting for April 21st to see what they decide to do. It's about a month from now. But the good news is that that gives us a month to continue calling these attorneys general, really bothering them, and being a nuisance, showing them that disabled people are here and we are not going anywhere. And whether you want to deal with us or not, you're going to have to listen to us.
Absolutely. And I will mention that there'll be, resources and links in the episode description, social media, mine and Britt's, I'm sure, and ways to contact your attorneys general, the 17 states. So just because it's always good to be prepared. So I know, hope for the best, expect the worst,
Yes.
what how can disabled individuals and their families, their friends, and whoever and allies essentially prepare in the event that this does go through and happen and 504 is no longer
Yeah.
constitutional.
Yeah. Oh, a scary possibility, but
Mhm.
you're absolutely right. It is so important to prepare. I think some things that people can start doing are looking up to see if their state has versions of Section 504, if they've adopted similar laws that prohibit disability discrimination. Because in some states, a governor will adopt a federal law, and they might even go above and beyond that law. For example, no state has done this, but with the drinking age example, the requirement was that the drinking age had to be at least 21. A state could have decided, you know what, we actually think letting people under the age of 30 drink is too risky.
Oh wow, I
And
didn't know that.
yeah, they could, in theory, bump it
Yeah.
up to 30. And so there's a lot of similar laws where the federal law offers a sort of a minimum level requirement. You have to do at least this much, but states can do more and say we actually want to give people more rights or be more protective. Um, so your state or your jurisdiction might have its own version of something like Section 504 to prevent disability discrimination. And so you can look into that, see if it exists in your state, and if it doesn't, it might not be a bad idea to write to local representatives, state senators, state congresspeople, your governor, and ask them to consider passing that kind of law for your state. You can ask if you're a student, you can ask your college or university what they would do if Section 504 was no longer the law, and figure out kind of what their plans are. Same with employers. You can look up if your hospital, your local airports, all of these places have policies in place, and ask them. But I think it's also not a bad idea to think about the ways that losing 504 would most impact you. So, whether it would be physical accessibility, access to healthcare, thinking about what that might look like, and working with the people around you to create support systems. Mia Mingus, who is an incredible writer and disability activist and scholar, has a really beautiful piece about care webs and care pods and these communities that we create for each other, that aren't formal ways of creating access the way a law is, but are ways of creating informal access together. And so she writes about care webs where People, have built their own ramps for members of their communities or take it upon themselves to organize rides for people to the hospital or even out of state to go visit relatives if there's no other accessible transportation. And all of these different ways that we can show up for each other that remind us that, like, similar to how so many prison and police abolitionists talk about how we keep each other safe, we can also keep each other cared for. We can also create access for each other. And I think that that is a power that we have that no court or legislature gets to make a decision about. So I think just hold on close to those communities, build those communities if you haven't found them yet, and know that we will continue to show up for each other in the same way that disabled folks have been doing since before Section 504 was passed. Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, of course, like especially if you go to a private university, oftentimes
Mhm.
they have their own. Of course, they have their own stuff, and you have to work with them. That's what I did when I was in college. They were very behind on accessibility, and they admitted that, and so we worked together. And now I'm talking to the public school, kindergarten through 12th grade in my hometown, because over the last, I mean, years, but especially the last few months, with school shootings happening,
Yeah.
and there was one in Winder, Georgia, which is not far from where I live, that was very close to home, and I just couldn't quit thinking about it. And so I'm talking to the superintendent and people at my local school to talk about what happens in the event of a lockdown or school shooting with disabled individuals who are in what they call a self-contained class, who may not know what how to stay quiet or understand what's happening, be able to process it. And so I'm in the early stages just talking to them. I've had one meeting. We're planning on a second one. And so it's just those little things that, unfortunately, you often think about how rules are put in place after something has happened. um, a lot of rules aren't proactive because either people don't think about it, they don't think it's important, and I think that this happening is igniting something in not only me but a lot of people to take these proactive measures,
Yeah.
and I think that's super important. So if you are in one of these 17 states, call your attorneys general office and any lawmakers that you can. And again, it's just very important. Get ahead of the thing. Get ahead of this is what I would say. Because unfortunately, well, I guess double-edged sword. Unfortunately, once it's in in like been filed, it's a long process. But on the other side of things, it takes so long to get through these. We have a
Yes.
chance to work against
Exactly.
it. So
Absolutely.
definitely a double-edged sword there.
Absolutely.
Um, so let's see. Now that we've provided facts about this and all the information presented, I want to hear your biased, unfiltered personal opinions, thoughts, anything you'd like to say that you might have been holding off to get the facts out there. So now
Yeah.
just say whatever you want.
Incredible. Thank you for the floor. Yeah, I mean, I just think this is a terrible lawsuit. I think it's a terrible idea. And it's at the same time not at all surprising. I think that the second Trump administration has really encouraged conservative people to fully just say the quiet part out loud. And it's proof to me that they don't actually care about the law or the Constitution or what any of those things should be. They really just care about being able to exclude people who aren't like them, people that they don't see value or worth in. Um, and I think that this kind of rhetoric has been coming for a while, since COVID, um, where, we saw so many people devalue disabled lives and say that our lives weren't worth saving, weren't worth protecting. And I think this is kind of the I won't say it's like the final outcome, but it's definitely one of the consequences of
Mm-hmm.
that kind of eugenicist rhetoric. People just blatantly saying that we should not prohibit discrimination against disabled people, that it is more important to save money than to allow people to participate in public life. Um, and I find it deeply frustrating that they are going after both disabled folks and trans folks. I mean, if you think of two groups that are just constantly excluded, under attack, um, misunderstood, feared, I think it's often trans folks, disabled folks, immigrants. Um, I just, to me, this whole thing is just like it feels like a blatant attempt to just get rid of the protections for some of the most vulnerable people. And I hate that they did it in this way because it feels almost meant to kind of pit disabled people against trans folks.
Mm-hmm.
That they maybe expect people to look at this and say, well, the problem isn't that they think disabled people shouldn't have rights. It's just that they think these trans folks shouldn't be included. And I think it's so important for all of us in the disabled community to be in solidarity with queer and trans folks, and to not let them divide us. Because if we've learned anything from our disabled ancestors, from past organizers, it's that solidarity is like the most important thing we have. The Section 504 sit-ins would not have happened without the Black Panther Party bringing meals every single day of their occupation. It would not have happened without a local union that helped wheelchair users travel in DC to go meet with the Department of Health and Human Services and
Mm-hmm.
convince them to pass this law. It's all of these moments of standing together, that has really allowed us to succeed. And I think at a time when so many people are under attack, we have to resist that impulse to say, well, maybe if we just let them go after this group, we'll be okay. We are so much stronger together, and that's why they're afraid of us, because they know that together, if we're able to organize together, be in solidarity together, that it's a lot harder to take us down.
Yeah, I think that at least in my experience, when I've talked to people, especially I would say like in our generation and the upcoming generation, is if you're a part of a minority group, you're much more likely to be inclusive to other minority groups
Yeah.
because you know that feeling of um, discrimination or the battle to be equal, or all the things that every minority group has to fight for. And so I do know some people that are part of the disability community that may not be as supportive of the trans community or other individuals, but I know so many are.
Yeah.
And it's also like I compare that, like pitting them against each other. I compare that to like when the media is constantly trying to pit two celebrity women or two well-known women
Yes.
against each other. They expect their fan base to pick sides, and
Mhm.
that used to happen. It was successful
Yeah.
for the media and for them for so long. But
Yeah.
now you look in the comments of any post of anything, and it's like, how about we can support her, or this
Yes.
person and this person, or we can disagree with this but also support this of the
Yes.
same person. And
Yes.
I think that the media, the government is so used to pitting against each other that they're going to quickly realize
Yeah.
it's not going to happen anymore. Um,
Absolutely.
so
Absolutely.
with that, I did just get a notice on my thing that said the time was almost up.
Yes.
So I thought it was unlimited, but I guess not. So I do want to say that there again will be resources in the description on my social media, on Britt's social media, and where can they find you to stay up to date on this and everything else that you are
Yes.
advocating for?
Yeah, you can find me online pretty much anywhere at My Elastic Heart. And that's, yeah, anywhere from Instagram, TikTok, Blue Sky. I am off of the site formerly known as Twitter.
Hmm.
Um, and yeah, and on my website, especially to get call scripts, so that you can call your representatives.
Absolutely, and those will also be linked on my link tree or whatever the version of that is. For me, there's so many, I don't remember what it is, to be honest. And yeah, again, we had another episode we talked about previously about more prisoner rights and disability rights and that intersectionality. So please check that out. And yeah, thank you so much for doing this. I know that you were so busy, but I thought that, you're the person I know that's most qualified to talk about this.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for having me. It's always great to be in conversation with you.